Joseph Cruz, welcome to Acquiring Minds.
Thank you. Thanks, Will, for having me. I'm just very excited to be here.
Joseph, you bought a construction supply business in December 2024. So you're about 15 months in. You traded spreadsheets for steel-toed boots, as you yourself put it in an article that you wrote about the experience. You've been doing a lot of writing about it, which I have leaned on to prepare for this episode. Really great articles that we'll link to in the show notes. But we're going to dive deep into this last 15 months of your getting into SMB ownership. Let's start off with some background on you, please, Joseph.
Thanks, Will. So my name is Joseph Cruz. I'm 34 years old. I currently live in Chicago, Illinois. I grew up in the western suburbs of Chicago in a small town called Roselle. Just to give a background of my childhood, my parents immigrated here from the Philippines in the 80s. I would say growing up, I had a pretty normal childhood. I would say ever since middle school, I was always working odd jobs, whether it's working at Dairy Queen, retail, laying shingles or building decks. So always had a mentality of just working as a child. Um, then I went to the University of Illinois at Chicago, UIC. I graduated in 2014 with a degree in economics and minor in political science and finance. While there, I did a bunch of internships at some banks downtown just to get that experience to going into finance. But while also at UIC, I started two startups. One was called Career Podium, and the other one was called Suited Well. Both of those, I ended up, walking away due to several issues, but learned a lot during those two experiences, which gave me an early look of what potential failure looks like. But I would say, going through failure, you learn a lot. So after
Joseph,
graduating
let
from
me pause you there because already two themes I wanted you to
yeah,
just speak a little bit more on. First, it was funny in our pre-call because you said you never really considered yourself an entrepreneur, and yet you'd started these two things in school, and then
yeah.
here you've walked away from a finance career to buy a business. So just pointing that out, that's kind of fun. And then the other on the more serious note is your the work you just referred to, and even the path you've chosen now is informed by your own parents' experience as immigrants working hard themselves. Give us just more about that and how you think that shaped you.
Yeah, I mean, I would say definitely when I became an adult, it definitely made me realize how hard my parents really worked. Growing up, I think my parents did a really good job making it seem like everything was normal. And them coming here from the Philippines, they're in their 30s. So that's my age right now. So I could not even imagine going to a different country right now, not knowing the language and starting a whole new life. So
Yeah.
looking back at it, right, it made me really realize, they were the real ones that took the big risk to make a better life for my older brother and I. And, to this day, that definitely shapes how I look at trying to grow and, working hard and all the good traits that they've instilled in me. But it started off with them taking the biggest risk, which is way bigger of a risk than what I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
definitely owe a lot to them and, them, giving a life that my brother and I can even have opportunities to do, entrepreneurship through acquisition and whatnot. So,
But
yeah.
in sort of their hard work, their risk makes you feel like you need to just take advantage of the foundation they've laid, to sort of self-actualize and work as hard as you can and go as far as you can, sort of thing. How do you think
Yeah.
it plays out?
Yeah, no, it's I think they gave us the option to even take this risk.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that I can take advantage of that.
Yeah.
So they gave us the opportunity to give us good life, to give us the opportunity to go to college, to take the risk that I'm doing now. So I want to honor them and try to make sure that I continue building a life that they risk their life to build for my brother and I.
Thank you for that, Joseph. Back to the plot. You get out of school and pursue what?
So I got a return offer at internship that I interned at while at college. It was a small investment bank downtown Chicago. I stayed there for about a year, and while there, I was doing more so sell side advisory for small to mid sized companies. So anywhere from a million EBITDA to 5 million EBITDA, and during that time, it really gave me the experience of working directly with CEOs, CFOs, and owners, and really gave me the opportunity to understand what questions to ask to really understand the story of the business. Because at that time, I was pretty much just writing confidential information memorandum sims, and it really allowed me to, at an early age, get exposure to how do you craft the story of a business and really understand what makes this company tick and what are the real advantages,
Hmm.
but also sprinkled with some marketing, some marketing on there. So it was good experience there, but I want to take that and move to larger corporations. So I moved to Fifth Third Bank, still in Chicago, and I spent my last 8 years there. Really great company, love my team, and while there, I did a number of rotations from their capital markets group, working on high yield and investment grade origination, structuring, and execution, also loan origination. All of it was surrounding debt advisory. And the most recent 3 years there, I was covering industrials. So that's manufacturing, distribution, construction engineering. And I would say that's where I really start to like what I'm doing today, which is infrastructure. But I would say at Fifth Third, it was mostly debt advisory, advising companies on how to structure their debt if they're refinancing bonds, loans, their bank debt, institutional debt, and if they're doing a M&A deal, then we'll help try to structure that deal. So it really gave me a good look into the larger corporations' capital stack and really what makes them valuable versus the smaller companies at my first firm. So that
And
was
it's where you fell in love with water and sewer, right?
Yeah, I'd say water and sewer really became a topic of interest, I would say in the last 2 years before I left, because I was dealing with distribution companies. So there were companies like Wesco, which is a big distributor, Fastenal, Core Main, Ferguson Waterworks, Advanced Drainage. These are all within the either distribution or the infrastructure space. And I just really appreciated the fact that they were around, and it was a really, like, looked over industry, I think, from the ETA space.
Hmm.
I've been listening to your podcast for, I don't know, since 2023. I read all the books, talked to people online, but nobody was really in the sewer and water space. It was a lot of people
Hmm.
were in the trades, plumbing, HVAC, right? And we know that, the attraction there. But it's really something that I started to like, and I just really want to, go into that more. But aside from just the fundamentals, I really liked where I specifically was in Chicago. The infrastructure of Chicago is very old. There's also a lot of fiscal stimulus going into the space. So there's a lot of things that at the base that made me want to dig into that. So that probably led me to the end of 2023 when I really started my ETA journey.
Great. And so, to be clear on your enthusiasm for sewer and water, it was
Yeah.
the tailwinds, the fundamentals of the industry, the demand and growing, what was perceived to be growing demand, because it's basically a subcategory of infrastructure broadly. Infrastructure in this country needs a lot of help.
Yeah.
There's real dollars being allocated by the government toward rebuilding the national infrastructure,
Yeah.
and Chicago in particular has an aging infrastructure. So within this macro trend, you even thought that geographically you were well situated to to go after the same trend.
Exactly. In 2021, there was a $3 trillion act called the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And I remember when we were talking to the infrastructure distributors, it was a lot of referencing that as industry tailwind. So it was just embedded in my head about the dollars coming
Mm.
in. So that that really started it. But yes, also I was trying to find a business and an industry that has been around for a long time and will be around forever, right? The way I position it to people that I'm trying to say, why did I even get into this space? Everybody goes to the bathroom, everybody drinks water, and it's going to be around forever. And yeah, as to your point, yeah, Chicago is one of the oldest infrastructure cities in the nation. Just to put it in context, there's about 400,000 lead lines in Chicago. They're doing a lead to copper conversion. That's going to be about 50 years of work.
Wow.
So my business is going to directly benefit from them replacing the lead to copper. And in that time, they're also looking at the manhole. They're looking at the different pipes. They're going to be doing upgrading. So there's that's enough. That was enough for me to really understand the benefit of the industry, and then go down the the whole of
Down
just
the
looking
pipe.
at, yeah, yeah,
Down the pipe.
exactly, down the pipe, exactly.
Okay, and so, but things are going well at Fifth Third. You said 8 years you were there. It sounds like
Yeah.
you liked your work. Sounds like you were thriving. So why the pivot to ETA?
So I'd say in 2023, I was always talking with one of my coworkers about doing something else. I think it is definitely a joke in finance of getting to a number and then leaving, right? Either retiring or doing something else. I feel like most of my colleagues were always looking at finance as just like a stepping stone.
Hmm.
But there were some people that were lifers that were going to stay in there forever. So I was always joking with my coworker about this laundromat that was in the corner of my neighborhood. I was like, I'm gonna go in there and then potentially buy the business, passive investments, right?
Mm.
So it was always I was always talking entrepreneurial discussions with my coworker, and he did stuff on the side too, and he was talking about it. So it was always just at the water cooler talking about that, not really talking about finance. So I would say, at the beginning of 2023 to the end, there was a lot of discussions like that. So it really just made me interested in learning more about that. And then I would say the first book I read in the fall of 2023 was E-Myth. So started just really understanding what was it about buying a business and what the options are. So I'd say after that, read all the different books like Traction, and then the Buy Then Build by Walker Dybel that you reference a lot. So it was a
Yep.
lot of that plus the entrepreneurial talk with my coworker that made me really just excited about what the potential was if I didn't stay in finance.
Hmm.
So I'd say that was enough. And then I was like, I'll take a look.
Is the book E-Myth about, is business buying in there? I've actually never
No,
read it, but I
E-Myth,
didn't know.
yeah,
But it's
E-Myth
about
was about,
it's about scaling small businesses, right?
yeah, yeah. It was about they talk about this baker, and it's talking about like the technician, like the manager, and something else. But it was really trying to understand from the baker's perspective why it's difficult for her to just scale the business if she's doing
Yeah.
everything. So it's really trying to delineate the different roles and responsibilities. So it was, sort of eye opening of what the potential is with the small business, and from what I've understood from dealing with the businesses back in my first job was a lot of people, become stuck at a certain size because they don't want to duplicate responsibilities, and it's a risk to get, I would say, to get past that 3 million revenue perspective. So it's a
Yeah.
lot of reconnecting to what I was originally doing in my first job. But yeah, E-Myth is not about small business buying like Walker Dybel's book, but it had a story in it about small businesses.
And it's also not about the internet, because with that E in the title, it makes it seem like it's something related to technology. And it's also was, I think it was written in the 90s, but that's something of a like
Yeah.
misnomer, that name, right? Because it's,
Yeah. I don't know why they called it E-Myth. I have no
I always
idea.
thought it was like an internet book until somebody was like, "Yeah, ignore the E. It actually it has nothing to do
Yeah,
with."
no,
But you're
that's
right.
a good point. I mean, I also recommended E-Myth to my friend who's a chiropractor, and he's starting his own practice, and there's an E-Myth book specifically for
Huh?
chiropractors.
Oh, funny.
So yeah,
Well, it's a classic, but it's old enough now that probably a lot of people overlook it. But it's
yeah,
probably worth my reading and probably others. So you kind of got the idea of buying a business on your own. It wasn't
yeah,
social media. It wasn't at school. It wasn't because a friend did it. It was because there was a laundromat down the block, and
yeah,
you always like, "I'm going to buy that business," or joked
yeah.
about it or thought about it. And
Yes.
total coincidence that it was a laundromat, which of course is kind of the symbol of buying small businesses in the Cody Sanchez universe, is like, go buy a
Yeah.
laundromat.
Yeah.
But that was not, you ultimately did do Cody Sanchez's course, but that
Mhm.
was a coincidence. Again,
Yeah.
you just saw a laundromat in your neighborhood, and it got the wheels turning. You could
Yeah.
have
No,
been Cody Sanchez there, Joseph.
I walk by it every day, and I just see it, and I see people in there all the time, and I just thought laundromat was just an easy, intro to what this life could look
Sure.
like. So, yeah, I just always wanted to go in there and then talk to the guy. But so this was at the end of 2023. I go in there, and originally I went into laundromat trying to pitch. Um, Putting a vending machine in there and doing some kind of consignment type deal. I honestly didn't even own a vending machine. I was just trying to see what would happen. So I go in there and the owner shoos me away. I go out. I gather myself. My wife is right next to me. I'm like, screw it. I'm gonna go back in there and talk
She's
to
your
this guy.
wingman here,
Yeah,
as
yeah,
you.
she helped, she supported me. She was like, "Okay, go ahead." So I go back in there, and for some reason, the owner just starts opening up to me, starts talking about his business, and I just ask him a bunch of questions. I'm in there for about 30 minutes, asking about the business, why he bought it, understood why he bought it, and then just throughout the whole time, I was so interested in the business itself. It was like I don't know, I was like possessed by just asking him a bunch of questions. So I go out of the laundromat and I was just so energized of just the whole potential, what the opportunity was. He was interested in continuing the conversation, so I got his number. So just after, I was just so pumped about just the possibility of owning this laundromat, even
Mhm.
though it was just such a dump. Um, and but it was just so like it gave me so much energy. So after that, I was hooked. So then from there, just continued really going in, and that was at the end of 2023. And then did a bunch of diligence on laundromat. So that was probably the point in my ETA journey where it really made me realize that this could be something.
Yeah. And it wasn't, even though you did proceed with laundromats first, it wasn't
Yeah,
about owning laundromats specifically. It was just about being an owner.
correct.
That was really what the kind of the opening that this conversation made in your mind.
Yeah, yeah. Even though I did not cover laundromats while at Fifth Third, right? But it was more so covering the infrastructure space. But yes, it was just the concept of owning something on my own and having just a separate income aside from just having a salary, which was something I was always interested in. And the option of having a passive investment. I was at my point in my career where I was like, I gotta diversify my income. So that's where it was all coming together.
And was this gentleman, this laundromat owner, was it passive for him?
Now he was working in it. He owned the dry cleaner across the street, and he was basically using that laundromat to wash the clothes from the dry cleaner. So he also mentioned that he owns the dry cleaner and he was potentially to sell it. So that also made me even more excited that okay, this could be a dual thing. So then just that possibility got me all energized and excited about the
But it's
possibility.
interesting that this guy was working in his business and you talked to him and got to see right
Yeah.
up close what it was like, his life. And yet you still thought that you could do this passively, it sounds like.
Yeah, no, the whole concept of working on the business for and the business was not something that I was even aware of at that time. I didn't even think about work. I didn't even think about having an operator. I was not as mature yet in the ETA journey to understand what it would have really taken. I was just attracted enough with the possibility, but didn't think about all the things that actually needed to be done until I would say a couple months later when I really looked into it.
Great. Okay. Anything more to say about the search itself?
Yeah, so I'd say after the laundromat, after that initial discussion, I started doing diligence on laundromats, looking up online, came across this YouTube channel called Investment Joy. He's all about laundromats and vending machines. So I really watched his channel a lot. The one thing that I did learn in the laundromat experience was I tried to understand why he bought that laundromat. So one thing that I did was I found out who the previous owner of that laundromat was, and then I contacted him. He owned another laundromat in another part of town. So I don't I found out about him through a vendor of that laundromat, and he gave me the contact information. I went to talk to him, and then I got the real rub of why he sold that laundromat, and then that basically destroyed why it destroyed all my optimism about that specific laundromat. But I would
Mm,
say the broader takeaway from that is during diligence, you need to be very resourceful of where you're getting information. And this was just, I got very lucky with finding the previous owner of the laundromat because he gave me the true understanding because he had no incentive of telling me, you know, of trying to pitch the business. So I started working with him to also try to buy another laundromat, but that didn't work out, and that's where I tried to become partners with him. So that was probably the end of my laundromat saga was with that guy, and then I found out about Cody's group, through my, cousin's husband, and I never heard about her at the beginning, so, I joined it, did it for about, I think a month or something, and, it was an interesting experience. I would say the biggest benefit there was if I had a question about the buying process, it was really easy to ask the Slack channel and
mhm,
somebody would respond.
mhm,
That was the biggest benefit was having somebody at my disposal whenever I had a question.
mhm.
But she had a lot of stuff that I already knew from my previous profession. But I would say the resources was the biggest thing.
When you talk about already knowing from your previous profession, so how much of your experience in finance, really 8 years more
Yeah.
experience than that, do you think how much of that do you think helped you, gave you an advantage in buying a business?
I think it helped tremendously to first really understand what questions to ask an owner. I think would not have been as easy unless spent so much time dealing with the decision makers of businesses. The financial analysis and all that, and really understanding the numbers and what makes it tick and what makes it efficient, and whatnot. I would say that's the biggest benefit, and really knowing how to write confidential information memorandum, which I ended up doing with my current business. But I would say the high finance part, advising on high yield bonds, invest like that had nothing to do with what I was
Yeah.
doing now. So I would say it was more so just the work ethic, understanding financials, P&Ls, balance sheets, knowing the
Yeah.
right questions to ask. I would say that was pretty much the takeaway. I could have probably, done that or learned that in my finance days in 5 years. The other, 8 years was just other high finance stuff that was not as apparent. But I will say also, structuring loan agreements really helped in, working in banking with SBA and understanding a process, understanding what parties are involved. I would say those things really helped with doing this whole purchase.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people getting into ETA don't come from finance and often are intimidated by the preponderance of former finance people and ask themselves, do I need to come from finance to do this? And my answer
Mhm.
is always no, though you should feel comfortable with numbers and there is going to be more learning for you and you should embrace that. And I've had many people from a financial background say um, it wasn't really directly applicable.
Yeah,
Although to say you come from finance, I mean, there's any number of flavors of finance. So some are relevant, some aren't. Yours happens that it was quite relevant. I mean, you were
yeah,
in banking, which is in the buying and selling of businesses. So
yeah, yeah. And I'd say it was, as far as, going back to the exposure to the infrastructure space, yeah, I understood how Core and Main worked, understand how Ferguson Waterworks worked, read all their earnings transcripts and their letter presentations, but it is nowhere near, um, I thought I knew stuff, but like looking where I'm at now, I feel like I didn't know anything back then,
oh
compared to what I know now. from just understanding how the operations works of this specific business, I understand the broader industry trends, right? Just the broader landscape, the largest, public version of my company. But as far as the true operations of mid-size and small businesses, it is nothing until you get into the seat. So it, yeah,
So
I'm still
your
learning every day.
your years in finance are less relevant now that you're on the other side of your transaction operating. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, finance didn't teach anything about operating. I mean, it was all just
Okay.
it was all about advisory, and that's one thing of on my when you're going to this journey, you have to understand really what are your whys, and one of my whys was to become an expert. Um, and working in finance, it's a lot of, especially where I was coming on, and as far as leverage finance and debt advisory, a lot of it was just that advisory, right? There was no skin in the game. There was
Mm,
no saying, this is my advice. And if it goes wrong, then it's on me. It was all a lot of mitigant and covering your actual recommendation, which was
mm,
something it was sort of a skill where you say something, but also say something to cover that just in case it doesn't happen, right?
mm,
So, but the whole ETA journey is completely different. It's the complete polar opposite side of that. It is you're putting everything on the line, putting your money where your mouth is, and really, proving to yourself that you made the right decision.
Joseph, where did you find the business that you bought?
I found it on BizBuySell.
And tell us about the business.
Yeah, so the business is called A&A Equipment Supply. It's a construction supply business with a focus on sewer and water. So we also sell to asphalt companies, concrete contractors, state agencies, municipalities. Um, we sell building materials such as precast concrete, pipe. We sell bag products like concrete mix, Portland cement, asphalt mix. We also sell equipment. We're an equipment dealer for the major construction manufacturers. We also do equipment repair. So anything small engine repair, we can do that. And we also rebuild engines. And then we also sell just the miscellaneous tools that you'll find at Home Depot. It's a business. Yeah. You're going to say something?
Oh, well, I was just going to say, and so, you carry on. Carry on.
Yeah. No, it's business has been around since 1982. And it's in Bensonville, which is directly next to O'Hare. So very centrally located as far as going north, west, and south in the Chicagoland area. And we also do a lot of work at O'Hare, which is the largest ongoing construction project in Illinois. It had 6 employees, had a general manager, um, and then it ran about 15% EBITDA margins.
And what was the revenue?
The revenue when I bought it was about 1.2 million.
15% EBITDA margin. So
Yeah.
we're looking at under 200,000 in earnings.
And sorry, the marketed SDE was 270,000. And then when I was actually underwriting the deal, I got comfortable at about 240,000 of SDE. So EBITDA,
Okay.
yeah, EBITDA, excluding the owner's salary was in the high 100s.
Yep. Is it a physical location? I mean, I know people. Is there a retail component where contractors actually come in and buy stuff from you guys physically or not?
Yeah, there's a brick and mortar store, a showroom that we're actually doing some renovations right now. So you walk in there, there's a showroom, some office area, there's a warehouse, and then yard space. So
Mhm.
contractors come in, they either pick up materials for on the job, and then when we check them out, we have a lot of the miscellaneous tools that is everyday use, and then they get that. But we also do a lot of shipments. I would say we do about 60% shipping to the actual job site or warehouse, and then 40% is customers coming in picking it up.
Mhm. Great. And so it's in sewer and water. So that's pretty remarkable that you found a business right squarely in the category that you were looking for.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's when I saw that most of their revenue came from sewer and water, I was immediately attracted just because I knew of companies that did that and just understood the attraction of it from trying to sell all the, trying to do marketing mode for all the bigger companies. I knew that there was immediate attraction there as, as as unique as that sounds, but yeah, once I saw that, I was like, there's something here. So then from there, did the full diligence on the business.
Yep. And so all of the materials and tools that are sold through A&A, is the name of the business,
Yep.
are to then go into projects. So it's tied to maintenance and construction, or just kind of like all maintenance. How do you think about, how should we think about that, new construction versus maintenance, because it's a very different sort of quality of revenue or cyclicality.
Yeah. No, I mean, I would say that is actually a very difficult um point to delineate because a lot of my customers, they don't really understand the maintenance part versus like new construction. A lot of my customers are just yard guys, right? Or like estimators that, put in a request. So to really delineate new construction versus maintenance, it's yeah, I can't really answer the exact breakdown of that, but I can just tell you it's all tied towards projects and construction.
Yeah.
There's the one thing that made me really interested in this business was they did not do any bidding and estimating on jobs. It was all contractors knowing the inventory that we had, and they would come in when they need it for a job. So, when you're looking at different distributors, there's a big difference of the distributor that is bidding and estimating on a lot of jobs versus walk-ins when they're just coming in. There's a difference in margin of how those businesses and how those business models differentiate. So once I saw that, there's also an opportunity to grow revenue from doing actual bidding and estimating. So that was one thing that I, you know, really got interested in, that they were around for 40 plus years without proactively going out there and trying to get full jobs. So there was something there that made it very interesting to peel back the onion.
Interesting. Okay, so
Yeah.
you're serving almost exclusively walk-in business. So people who, contractors who need something right now, it wasn't
Yeah.
initially spec'd or bid or estimated into the job. And so presumably that stuff is higher margin,
Correct.
but less predictable. And so if
Yes.
you so you want
Yeah.
it, so to get into the bidding and estimating, it's going to be lower margin, but you can build out a pipeline. You can really make it more systematic and do forecasting and so on. And probably all that aside is probably just like a whole nother, you know, pot of revenue to go after.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, the way I would summarize the business, and I actually got this from another like kind distributor, but they're in the more rebar distribution, is we're in what is called like the oh shit business, where the contractor or estimator, as you said, misestimates how much is needed on the actual job. And we carry the most commonly stocked items for my end markets: sewer, water, concrete, asphalt, excavation, etc. That we have that mix of inventory where they'll always they'll always come back to us.
Hmm.
So as you said, yes, it is a higher margin business, and from a gross profit perspective, we're about 40 to 45%, which is
Hmm.
very different from Corn Main, which runs about 25 to 30%. And some of my other competitors pretty much run in the high 20s. And
Mm.
because it's due to the difference of the business model.
The oh
So
shit nature of the
yeah,
business.
yeah. So I knew that they had that. So if we were able to tack on 2, 3 jobs, right, that were 200, 300,000 each, then, we could automatically increase revenue by, a decent amount. So I knew it
Yeah.
had good enough staying power from that perspective. And it's been around for, 40 plus years. So it had staying power, enough for me to buy it.
Yeah. Yeah. And Joseph, just with the current business model of contractors coming in when they're missing something on a live job, why is Home Depot not the solution for them? Is this more specialized stuff that you sell than they can find at Home Depot?
Yeah, I mean, at Home Depot, which I actually Home Depot, Lowe's, and Menards, I always look at their prices to try to be somewhat competitive. I'm always going to be higher than them, just given the nature of their business. But yeah, you can definitely get a lot of the stuff that I have at Home Depot, but you can't get all of it. So the
Mhm.
value there is just trying to provide that one-stop shop for certain contractors. And, it was marketed as a one-stop shop, but it is not a one-stop shop. We're like a majority of the stop shop, right? So we have enough of the stuff, and we're very conveniently located, which is probably the biggest differentiator of my business versus my competitors is I'm just centrally located directly next to O'Hare, and there's a lot of jobs in the surrounding area. And the southern guys that are going north, they stop by. The northern guys going south, they stop by, and vice versa. So the
Mm.
location of my business is everything. So that is a very big reason why
And
it's
what
been
about
around.
weaknesses to the business, Joseph? What did you see as things that were not so great about it?
Yeah, the weakness is project based, right? That's
Yeah.
big thing that I remember even back at Fifth Third of why we hated construction businesses was the the project based nature. And my mitigant to that was, well, it's been around for 40 years and it's held revenue in the 1 to 2 million range since the 90s. Right. So if it's holding that, then it's doing something right. And my other caveat there was I looked during 2020. Revenue decreased, I think, about like 5-10%, but it wasn't materially different than what most businesses were impacted by during COVID. So that was one risk. Another risk was seasonality, very seasonal. We make all our money from March to November. December to February is negative profit months. That was something I learned is if you're gonna buy a construction business that's seasonal, don't buy it in December like I did. It was it was, uh, it was a tough January and February of 2025 emotionally. But that's one risk, and my mitigant there was I was gonna try to improve the services side of the business. The service side is really nice. It's a higher margin type aspect. It's a value add of the business that none of my competitors have. If my mechanics are working 8 hours a day, 8 hours of they call it wrench time, then it should be about 65% margin per job. But that's not always the case. There's downtime, ordering parts, talking to customers. So there's that aspect, but that was the part where I was going to try to increase the winter maintenance because a lot of contractors like to winterize their equipment during the winter. So my goal was to grow that during the off season, which would potentially offset the seasonality. Um, I'd say those are the two big, and then the other thing was just the age of the employees. Um, 6 employees, but 3 4 of the 6 employees were in their 60s. 2 of them was in their 70s. So that was a big risk that I had to figure out at the beginning. So yeah, seasonality, project-based business, um, and then employee age was the biggest risk.
Great. And going back to the longevity of the business and the consistency of revenue, you said $1.2 million in revenue going back to the what, 2000s, the 90s?
Yeah, I mean, the oldest financials I had was 2006, 2007, and it was on paper, and I saw that they did 1.3 million. And it amazes me, but also really makes me question how is this business still around
Yeah.
1.5 million for the last 20 years? And the reason is the nature of the business model, right? It is a business where we depend on people coming in when they need something. There's no proactive sales efforts there, right? Because we're a high margin business. We're a last, when people need something, they come in and get it. So it's like it's a convenience business model, which is very hard to grow.
Well, I guess it's also like I mean, you said you do a lot of shipping. I think
Yeah.
60% is shipping. So, but the way I hear you talk about it is very much like people coming in, even though that only represents 40% of the revenue. But anyway, I guess what I was going to say is that if you just think about sort of any store, any
Yeah.
retail footprint, eventually it will reach its ceiling
Yeah.
and it's hard, and it kind of has a natural ceiling, and it's hard to push a business that is constrained by four walls beyond its natural ceiling. And I
Yeah.
wonder if that's kind of a dynamic here. But I guess
Yeah.
the answer is no, because you still have 60% of your revenue that's distributed out that has
Hmm.
nothing to do with the retail footprint. And that, arguably should have been growing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's the one of the biggest struggles in the first year was trying to figure out how to grow revenue. And my main focus in the first year was through service, was growing the equipment repair side. Because the material to grow a commodity based business is difficult. Um just because the old adage is, what's your price? Right? It's such a price competitive thing, and
Yeah.
they'll pretty much say, "What's your pricing compared to the largest competitor that I know of?" And then it's the battle of trying to deliver the whole value of. We also have equipment repair, rental. We have the tools. We sell equipment, and then the materials. But it's not as easy to package that value and make contractors understand that, right?
Yeah.
All they're going to ask about is the price.
Yeah.
So there's something that we're working on right now to combat that. And the second year has definitely gone off to a really good point versus the growth of growing the commodity side in the first year.
Great. Well, we're going to hear a bunch of what you've done as owner. But before we get there, I want
Yeah.
to hear about the price of the business and how you structured the deal. There's some interesting nuggets in here. So, what was it selling for?
So I don't remember. Yeah, I don't remember what it said on BizBuySell, but I do know I bought it for 536,000. So the marketed SDE was about 270. I was underwriting it at about 250. So that's about two and a quarter. I knew that these businesses would sell 2 to 3 times. I definitely wanted to be on the lower end of that. I was pretty much looking at what was the DSCR coverage. I want to be at least 2 times.
Hmm.
And then so my DSCR was 240 as far as the headline SD that I was underwriting to, but taking out the projected salary for myself of about 60 grand. That was about in the high 100s, and my P&I was just below 100. So my DSCR coverage was just over 2 times, which I was comfortable with. I was not
Hmm.
willing to go below that, just because that's the cushion that I wanted. So and I knew it was gonna be in the low twos from a multiple perspective, so that's what I ended up purchasing it for.
Let me repeat some of that back
Yeah,
for the audience. That was great, Joseph. So, the after the earnings, the SDE, seller discretionary earnings that you had at around 250, but then if you take that down another 60 to account for you owner operator's
yeah,
future salary, or a future GM salary of 60,000, that gets you to around 190. Your principal and interest payments, your P&I payments for the SBA loan, were going to be about 100 a year.
right.
So 190 is almost two times 100,
Yep,
that's the debt service coverage ratio. That's how you get to that two number. And
yeah,
that's generally in our world, I don't want to say conservative in a bad way, but
yeah,
it's conservative in a good way. And it sounds like you wanted that.
yeah. No,
You,
it's,
you want it to be conservative.
yeah, the way I looked at it too was you can look at the EBITDA cushion, and then my cushion from there was about like 20-25% before my DSCR coverage would be below 1 times. So I just wanted to have adequate cushion there. So I feel like for anyone buying a business, you should not have DSCR coverage below 2 times. That means you're going to be super over levered. Like my exact P&I was 90 grand. So it was a little above 2 times. And then I also looked at the cash on cash return from just the return perspective. So my cash on cash expected for the first year was about 90%. So that was, one thing that, also guardrailed my actual purchase price.
Talk us through that, please, Joseph,
Yeah.
with numbers and how you got to that 90% number.
Yeah. So the the 90%, so I put in 75 grand in it. So when I looked at the actual net income at the end of the year, it would be, 100. minus 90 or 190 minus 90 to get 100. So it was about, so 75 divided by 100, it was about 80%. So that's how I
Yeah.
looked at my cash on cash return. That was my expected. The actual, little different. So, so
Okay.
yeah.
But also, Joseph, I have to press on that because you're not taking into account your own salary there. Or did I misunderstand?
No, yeah, it was the 190, which was the 250 minus the 60 to get to the 190,
Oh,
and then
oh yeah,
the one,
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
190
There you go.
minus the P&I. So it was expected net income of 100.
There you go. Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah,
Right,
yeah,
right. Which was a little different. Okay,
yeah.
great. But certainly you put down $75,000 in the next year into a business, you generate $100,000. Not a bad cash on cash return, to
Yeah,
say
no,
the
it's
least.
wonderful. Wonderful on paper.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, on paper, right. And we're gonna hear about this year one. But let's also hear, Joseph, about like how, first of all, the salary that you're leaving, or kind of what you're walking away from in finance land,
Yeah.
and how you timed that, because there was a little bit of overlap there. Talk us through both of those, please.
Yeah, so when I was looking at the business, I signed the LOI in June of 2024. Typically in finance, you get your bonuses in February. So once I did that, I knew that I had to stretch this diligence for almost a year, three-quarters of a year. So I was trying to balance the expectation of the seller, my diligence, and also the timing of my bonus. Because once I got into diligence, I knew that I was gonna eventually leave. So I wanted to make sure I was as close as possible to that bonus time. So when I was leaving, so the salary so I was a VP at Fifth Third, so it was about 200 grand. So that's the salary. But as far as like the bonus, it could be, one times to one and a half times that, depending on how good it was. So, definitely leaving from a salary perspective, right? Going 200 to 60 or 75 right now. It's a lower amount, but I just need to make sure that my fixed expenses from a living perspective was covered. So I would say the topic of trying to match whatever salary, it's different, I guess, depending if you're coming from a high paying job versus low paying, it's just different. I was not looking to match what I was making. I was more
Yeah,
so looking, what is the opportunity of this business and what I think I can grow it to. I was also looking at the different benefits of, building your own business, right? Being an expert, all the whys that I, worked on
yeah,
trying to really understand. So there's, from a dollar perspective, I think the trying to match your salary is I just wasn't looking to do that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah,
Well, just to add to that, Joseph. So to be clear, it was $200, 200,000 base, but
yeah,
your bonus could reliably get you into the mid six figures,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah. I'd
So
say
you're walking away
mid,
from mid
yeah,
six
low mid,
figures,
yeah, low mid six
low
figures.
mid six figures. Call
Yeah,
it 400-ish thousand dollars a year.
yeah,
So while you're not looking to replace $400,000 a year, the bigger the difference between the money you're leaving on the salary you're leaving and the salary you're coming into as a small business owner, the more you have to, feel good about your whys. I mean,
yeah.
it's inevitable to not consider the disparity there. And so just worth pointing out. Go
Yeah,
ahead. You were saying something?
the one thing I would add there is, in finance and any high paying job, I think it's very difficult to live a low cost life, right? When you're making that amount of money, you're just spending hand over fist. And I know in the pre-call I said that I didn't really spend much, but not really looking at it, I feel like when I was making a lot of money, I would just spend on whatever. Right. Even though my fixed expenses were low, my discretionary spending was pretty high. Right. Eating out, going on vacation, right, spending on watches, right, buying a car, etc. Right. There's a lot of that. And the discipline of controlling that while you're making a lot of money is very difficult.
Hmm.
So the one thing that I also learned that, wasn't really something I thought about during diligence, but now my life now, even though I'm making less of an income, my control on all my costs and budgeting is way better than what I had when I was in finance. Just
Hmm.
because when you know you're gonna have money coming in, right? Like spending a dollar, whatever, just spending $10,000, over the weekend or the month, it doesn't really impact you, which is something that it creates what is called like lifestyle creep
Sure.
when you're in finance, and you buy a big house, right? You're levered to the gills. You have a mortgage payment, car payment. So I made sure before I got to that point, I really like, and now I'm here, right? So I'm not at that point where I have heavy fixed expenses. But that was one thing that I want to note on, leaving that high paying job. It's a different mindset of
Yeah.
how you're living life. Now I'm just living way more, I would say, responsibly
Yeah.
with how I'm living. It is. I mean, yeah.
But in what was there any discomfort in tightening up your lifestyle? The fact that you couldn't just blow money, I know that's a problem of the
Yeah.
fortunate, but it did mean that you had to get your arms around your lifestyle, and so
Yeah.
it can be hard to kind of step back, or at least feel like you're stepping back, even though we
Yeah.
we all understand that there are these whys to going down this path that are much bigger than blowing money, being able to blow money.
Yeah.
Still, it's like, oh, I have to watch my money now, and before I didn't, and that's a change to your day to day.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would say the change is not was not as difficult as I expected. I think with going into the ETA journey, owning your own business, I had to correct a lot of ways that I was living, whether that's, health or, habits or, financial control. So a lot of that parts of my life really improved, I would say, in the past 2 years, all while going on the journey of buying my own business. So, even though I had to reduce my spending, it was all for the better, right? From
Yeah,
just how I lived, my health, my habit, it all got better after
yeah,
living after, pursuing this. And I don't know if it was because I had to or I chose to, but I chose to, right? But um, it's, like, controlling my costs was just, part of having a better life overall. So that's how I
yeah,
looked at it, but yeah, I am walking away from a lot of money, and let's say I was able to, improve on those 3 things while at Fifth Third or making a lot of money. Yeah, it could have been great, but I didn't, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
that's how I look at it now, and, the overall, theme of this is I chose this option, so it's gonna be the best option that I made.
yeah.
So that's how I think about it.
That's great. And to be clear, you don't have kids.
I do. I have a 4-month-old. So she was born yeah, she was born in October. So, yeah, left Fifth Third, bought a business, had a kid. It was a lot last year.
Okay, okay. Well, congratulations on
Yeah.
being recently a father. But it sounds like where I was going with that question was all of the expenses that can be associated with kids, and you're starting to see them, but you're not there yet in a big way. You'll get there.
Yeah, no, it's I mean, I had to make so for the first year of A&A, I didn't take a salary. I had enough savings to, invest back into the business if need be, but also cover all my fixed expenses. So, I would say anybody pursuing the journey, you need to have at least a year or 2 of fixed expenses and more.
Yeah,
I don't think I could have done this without having that cushion and putting it all into the business. There's no way I would have done this.
yeah, yeah. Well, now that also has to do with the size of business you bought, though.
Correct. Yeah.
Fair.
Yeah.
If you'd bought a bigger business and there was more cash coming out of it, you wouldn't have had to have such a big cushion.
Yeah, and, but that was part of my criteria was buying a business that allowed me to have that amount of cushion. I did not wanna buy anything bigger.
You mean you didn't want to spend more of your own cash resources to buy something
Correct.
bigger?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
So say more about how you chose the size, because we haven't said, but it will be obvious to regular listeners. This is a pretty small business in terms of earnings and in terms of everything, number of employees
Yeah.
and so on. Although, God, gotta love that 40-year longevity. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But a business that's thrown off, call it $250,000 of earnings, quite small. Is there more to say about how you thought about that?
Um, no, I think the only way that I thought about the purchase was, yeah, looking at the DSCR coverage, the cash on cash return, my equity into the business, um, and also what was my leftover savings
Yeah.
after I put that equity in. So once I got comfortable with all of that, that's how I looked at just the size of
Yep.
the typical business.
Yep. We've heard. Remind us what the price was that you ultimately paid.
536.
536. Okay, and tell us about the structure here, because there's some interesting
Yeah.
pieces to that.
The purchase price, the uses was 536 for the consideration. It was 128 for working capital, and then like 20 grand of the professional fees and SBA fees or whatever. So total was in I think mid 600s or mid high 600s. My uses was 75 equity, 55 seller notes, and then 550 SBA loan. So that was the source and uses. But there was a caveat to that where there was an earnout from a side letter that I had post close. And there was also withholding of 25 grand or a holdback where I could have used that holdback if there was any unexpected claims on the business, legal, vendor, etc., that I could have tapped into to rectify that liability.
Let's take both of those in turn, because your structure was pretty standard up until the earnout and the holdback. So the earnout was a side letter, which the SBA doesn't allow formally, but you were counseled that it is something that people do. So we are not advocating that here on Acquiring Minds, but it is something that listeners should know about. It happens. Although my sense is that as SBA gets stricter across the board and is introducing more and more rules and tightening up who gets loans, they'll probably come down harder on this. In fact, I think they explicitly said in a recent rule change, no side letters, which I believe. Anyway, but what a side letter is you make a separate agreement with your seller.
Yep.
That is basically an earnout. And earnouts themselves are also not something that the SBA you can have in an SBA structure. And you don't. It's kind of something done to the side that is not part of the formal SBA loan process. Does that all sound right to your case?
Yeah.
And what was the earnout? How was that
The
structured?
earnout was 50 grand. And the only reason why I added that earnout was 2 weeks or 3 weeks before close, the seller said that the general manager was going to retire. So once I found that out, I was like, okay, well, I got to have additional coverage in the longevity of this business. So it was the addition of the earnout. Plus, I told the seller he has to stay on for 6 months before he can go.
Mm-hmm. And before that, he was just going to leave on when? Like immediately?
I forgot.
Okay.
But it was probably pretty close after.
Pretty quick.
Close. Yeah.
Pretty close soon after closing. And the earnout was what? What was what? That the business has to generate more revenue?
1.35 million. Yeah, off of revenue. But if I could have done it again, I would have probably done it over profit. If I can do it again, and if if this happens again, I would have done an earnout based on profit, just because revenue is an easy figure, and from a buyer perspective, profit, you can run a lot of stuff through expenses that could lower it, that is beneficial to the buyer.
Right. Although a seller is probably going to push back for that very reason, because you can play around with it. You can play around with profit. Okay. And by the way, the earnout. So you introduced this earnout to protect yourself. It was not, because earnouts, I think, traditionally are to incentivize the seller to, if they're going to stay in the business, to keep things marching ahead and to reach for revenue and push under the new ownership. Really, you were treating this as a way to mitigate your own risk because the GM's walking.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the way that for the listener you can arrive at a SBA allowed risk mitigant is the forgivability of the seller note. So you can structure the seller note, or basically say that the seller note will be forgivable, so you don't have to pay all of it back based on certain criteria. So it's effectively like, if your seller note, I think you said, was 55,000, you
Correct.
could make seller forgivability where, oh well, if we don't hit this certain revenue number, if we don't maintain the same revenue in the first year or two, then we only have to pay you back half the seller note or none of the seller note. It's another way, it's another structure that the SBA does allow, importantly, to help mitigate risk.
Yeah, and I didn't
Want to
know
say anything to
about
that?
the
Yeah.
I didn't know about the forgivable seller note. The earnout was advised by my lawyer, but if I knew about the forgivable seller note, I would have probably done that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the only reason I'm highlighting it is again because under SBA rules you can do forgivability, so that's a bonus, but also because the way to think about forgivability versus earnout is generally like incentivizing the seller to keep pushing and reach new revenue goals under the new ownership, and forgivability is more defense. It's risk mitigation. So one is incentivizing growth, the other is protecting downside. Um,
Yeah.
and then on the holdback, Joseph. So say how that was structured.
The holdback was just a reduction of the cash consideration at close. So, I mean, I guess if you look at the loan agreement, it was like, purchase price less any working capital adjustments, less the holdback amount of 25 grand. And the 25 grand was pretty much tied to any claims on the business from third party people. So whether it's like, if the business was sued, or if it was, there was like vendors claims or whatever. Because I did a stock purchase of this business, so I had to be extra careful with anything that came from the pre-existing entity.
Yep.
So that holdback was instilled just to cover that fact.
And the way it actually, the mechanics of it was just that the 25 grand just stayed in the bank account.
Yeah. So the
Essentially,
way,
it
yeah,
wasn't like escrow or something like that.
correct. Yeah, the cash mechanics of the holdback and the earnout was the seller just left the 75 grand in cash in the business's operating account. So there was no rewiring of anything. So instead of, the owner taking all the cash and then wiring it back, he just left that money in there, which made it very easy. So that was like a very like nice thing to do from his
Yeah.
perspective, and just
Yeah.
made it convenient for everybody. Um, so yeah.
And that's absolutely what you want, is to be the one with the cash in hand. What's the phrase in the attorney phrase that like 9/10 of the law is possession or something? Point is, you want to be the one with the money in your hand and they have to claw it back from you, not the other way around.
Yeah. Yeah, no, yeah, definitely agree.
And actually, this is playing out now, right, Joseph? Because on the vehicle age was a factor that you didn't see, and so tell us about that.
Yeah, so in a lot of these small businesses, they run the equipment to the ground, especially heavy CapEx businesses. So there's 3 trucks, and today one of those 3 trucks works, and there was a lot of maintenance and repairs on the 2 trucks. One of them just doesn't even work anymore, so I can't even use it. So there's gonna be some claims on just the unexpected expense from repairing those and buying a new truck that I'm gonna use as evidence to try to reduce the cash back. But again, it's gonna be just, I have a good relation with the seller. I'm gonna talk to him honestly, and we're
Yeah,
gonna come to something in agreement. And the seller was a great guy. I still talk to him almost, every 2 weeks. I'm
yeah,
definitely gonna talk to him forever. And this is just one of those trust things where I have to be like, this is what happened. Can you help me out? And it should be
yeah.
a meeting of the minds, and hopefully the conversation is you know mutual.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Why the stock purchase versus asset purchase?
Distribution. So there was so A&A, they also sold to state agencies like the Department of Transportation, Illinois Tollway Authority. So there was agreements from those agencies tied to the actual tax ID number.
Yeah.
So if I bought the asset, then I would have to redo that, and it would have been a mess. So
Yeah.
even though I can amortize the goodwill, which was about 100 grand, I mean, I'd rather keep those agreements because one of the things that I liked about the business too was they had agreements to sell to the Department of Transportation that was recurring revenue, which was nice. So I
Yeah.
did not want to risk with that at all.
Absolutely. And the real estate where you guys are, it sounds like the business does not own that.
Correct. Yeah, we lease it.
Awesome, Joseph. I want to spend time on many of the takeaways that you'd put pen to paper and shared on your LinkedIn. But first, you did a second small acquisition quickly after
Yeah.
being into the business. What did that look like?
Yeah. So I did a little add on for a mechanics business. It was just a guy in a shop. It was somewhat brokered by one of my customers where that customer also used that mechanic. So that my customer knew that, we could also use another mechanic. So he sort of brokered the deal. And, I really thanked him for it. So the mechanic that, we ended up acquiring, his lease was coming up. He was basically getting kicked out after being there since the 90s. So he did not want to go through the headache of finding a new place, right? Signing a new lease and all that. So while I was doing diligence in December, the seller of A&A brought us together so I could meet him. So the way we structured it was the seller was going to purchase half of the or was going to fund half of the purchase price of that guy's business, and I was going to fund the other 50%.
Hmm.
So it worked out. That was actually like looking now, that was the best decision I ever made. So at the end of December, I just did a bill of sale where I just purchased his inventory equipment. And then I just hired him as an employee. And then so he brought all his customers, all his vendors. Um, and then yeah, the first year, I would say our service was up. What was it? Our service was up like 200 something percent just from the, current service work plus bringing that guy on. So it really worked out. And that was actually a strategy that I'm definitely going to leverage in the future is acquiring services businesses just because when you acquire the service or the repair shop, then you can cross sell all the different materials that you have to those contractors.
Yeah. Yeah. And so is there in your world, is there a lot of kind of one man mechanic type businesses to acquire,
Yeah.
bolt on?
There's a lot of mechanics, good mechanics that, it's them and 2 other guys, 3 other guys. They had a really good skill. They try to grow the business, but then they just grow it to a point where it's just a lifestyle business where they're, earning a comfortable wage, but they don't really wanna push it. So, one of my growth strategies is definitely doing a similar playbook and looking at other service companies.
The timing to get your bonus from your employer that worked out, right? So you did stay on through then. So how did that work with the transition and day one, and what did that look like for anybody out there who might not want to quit before they actually take ownership?
Yeah, so I closed on business December 10th. My bonus was coming in conveniently at the latest time in my 8 years at Fifth Third. It was going to come at like the second week of March. Long story short, because I know I'm not going back into finances, I didn't tell anybody that I acquired a business just because there's certain like potential rules with owning another business and you have to fill out a bunch of documentation. So I just didn't say anything, which is very risky. Um, and for the first week or two, I was very scared about somebody finding out. But after a month, I was like, nobody's gonna find out about this small business. Like nobody cares, right? So I was pretty much, working full time. It was still during the days of, being able to work from home. So, during my days work from home, I'd work a couple hours, then I'd go to the business. So from December to March, I was probably at A&A a day or two a week. And then the rest I was at Fifth Third. Um, so the one thing I would say to that is, even though you're gonna leave and pursue something else, you should still focus on your W-2 and try to make sure that you still love it. Just because if you know you're 1 foot out the door, your last 2, 3 months is gonna be absolutely miserable. So, you should just try to convince yourself you still like the job just because 'cause it'll make it go by faster.
Okay.
Um, so, yeah, I end up, I got my bonus on March, what is it, March 10th or whatever that Friday was. Um Quit that morning of, and then yeah, I remember that day. In that afternoon, I had the 8-week meeting with our doctor for the baby to, make sure that the baby was viable. So it was one of my happiest days, happiest days ever.
Well, here we are on March 2nd, so we're coming
Yeah.
up on the anniversary of that very day.
Yeah.
Uh,
Crazy.
and Joseph, what about people at the business at A&A? It sounds like you were present enough that they weren't, that you were present enough for that early transition, those early couple of months.
Yeah, the first week after I bought it, um, I took a week off and I was pretty much at the business every day for that first week. I was honest with everybody of what my positioning was, that I'm waiting to get the bonus, in February or March. They all understood it. I remember in the day one speech, it was I really communicated with the seller. You have to sell me, right? You have to put your trust in me. And I remember him, you know, saying to everybody that he sold the business. And here's Joseph. He didn't say anything about building me up. So I will say you should definitely communicate with the seller exactly what to say because they're probably gonna get all emotional about leaving the business. And I could tell he was emotional, which is why he probably didn't even remember to, introduce me and build me up and, demonstrate that trust. But yeah, no, during the first week, I was honest with everybody. I was very transparent. Told them what I want to do, but really just listen to them and built a good enough relationship for everybody to really, be excited about what the changes, which most of them were happy with it.
Great. Well, Joseph, let's now turn to what you've learned or some of your takeaways, lessons, stories from this year of ownership or year and a couple months of ownership. As I keep saying, you've posted about this on LinkedIn. We'll I think you have 4 articles. We'll link to all 4 of those in the show notes for people who want to read them. They're great write ups of as you've gone and lessons from the trenches. So I plucked out a few things from those articles that I'd like to just go through with you. The first you've already touched on, losing the GM 2 weeks before close. We've heard about how that ended up in you structuring an earnout to mitigate that risk. But say other than that, the kind of the mechanics of how you kind of try to mitigate that risk, that would still be scary. And how did you approach that? And what was the upshot and how it all worked out?
Yeah, no, initially I was scared. I mean, I was like, I don't know how I'm gonna do this. Um, but after added the mechanic of the earnout, plus told the seller that he needs to stay on, I was like, okay, this is enough for me to continue. I would say after I left Fifth Third to work in the business, without the GM, it really forced me to learn everything about the business in 3 months. And the GM was doing so much where, that was part of the selling point of the owner wasn't doing a lot. So that's why I liked it. So now on the flip side, he was doing so much where the owner didn't know where some of the things were. So I was forced to learn it for those, first 3 months that I was there before the owner left. And I would say it was a blessing in disguise just because it forced me to figure everything out. And I knew if the GM was still there, he was a great worker. He knew exactly what to do, every product, where to get everything. But it also forced me to create resources, systems, writing things down, right? A lot of things that you want a business to have before you bought it, I pretty much was forced to do at the beginning. And it also allowed me to, start the culture change of, how we're doing things differently. If the GM was there, I could have easily seen, you know, it being easy from my perspective because there's a guy just doing everything, but then to create little changes in the business, I think it would have been a lot more difficult, not because the GM was, difficult, just because he did everything. And I looking back at it now, I'm happy that it worked out the way that it worked.
Writing everything down was something that you highlighted as super key in
Yeah.
one of your takeaways. Say, is there anything more to say about this? You're talking to an audience who understands SOPs
Yeah.
and getting things out of an owner or GM's head and onto paper. But is there anything more to say than what we all kind of intuitively understand here?
Yeah. I mean, I would say one of the biggest things that I was just shocked by when I got into the business was, that we have maybe like 750 to 1,000 different SKUs. And when we have to order something, I'm like, how do I know where to order something? And only the GM and the owner knew in their head where to go, what to buy, what it was called. And I was like, this is crazy. So even before the
And terrifying.
yes, terrifying, 'cause there's no way to learn how to do the job. So, it was more so just creating. I remember one of the first things that we did was create a vendor list of every vendor and everything that we buy from that vendor, and we still use that to this day. So writing things down like that, and even like, writing down the logins and the passwords to I remember the owner was freaking out about not knowing the password to UPS. And I just had to write that down because the GM knew that. So it was a lot of just, resource materials. We now have a SharePoint where everybody can go. Um, Before there was no shared folders or anything. There was no communication through the computer. Um, so a lot of writing things down that, we could be used for training materials. That's, one of the bigger things that I did for the first year was create materials that we could use to train other people.
One thing I heard you say much earlier, Joseph, was I think you said like eh, part of your why is becoming an expert.
Yeah.
Did I hear you say that? Well,
Yes.
I'm not sure I've heard somebody say that before. What did you mean? And what reminded me here is that the GM being gone and you having to download everything from his and the owner's head and write everything down accelerated your own learning curve so that you could become an expert faster. But anyway, what is this goal of becoming an expert? What do you mean by that?
I'd say it all started, that becoming experts, it stemmed from my days back at Fifth Third, where, becoming a subject matter expertise was, my goal at Fifth Third, right? So even though I was able to talk about financial products, high yield investment grade, talk about the market, I really want to become an expert in like an actual industry. But it's very difficult when you're coming from like a financial advisory perspective. Like you don't really get into the inner workings. So when I knew that I was going to buy a business, I want to become an expert in that industry.
Hmm.
And even, looking at what I'm doing now, you have to be fully engulfed in whatever business you're doing. You have to join every trade association. You have to talk to every vendor, every customer, every competitor, and you have to really understand the product. So that's where I want to. That's part of my why was I really want to, looking back at my life, I want to know, what was I an expert in? And
Mm.
I guess it's gonna become sewer and water. So that was that. But even the GM and the owner, you know, they were great, but they were not sewer and water experts.
Mm,
It's a different, there's things that they did, that, you know, that, or there's things that they didn't do that I'm doing now. And I would say now I know way more about sewer and water than both of them. Even after, 6 months to a year, they knew a lot about the business and how it operated, but being a sewer and water expert is a lot different than just, you know, processing invoices and, just selling things.
yeah.
There's a lot of there's a lot of different things in becoming an expert, like I said before.
Yeah. And so, I your expertise, I feel like, is probably industry expertise. What about the nuts and bolts that you're literal nuts and bolts that you might be selling? All those SKUs,
Yeah.
all that inventory, how it's used. We're not talking about you learning that stuff. I mean, functional, but you're talking higher level subject matter expertise, right? Industry
Yeah,
expertise.
yeah. I would say it's more so industry expertise. Who does what locally? Who's the real players? Why are these players getting those contracts? Who's supplying? Who's the big supplier? Like really understanding that, but also understanding the product underground as well. But yeah, as
Yeah.
far as like the tools and equipment that we sell, I know enough to be dangerous, but it is extremely hard to be an expert in everything that we sell. It's just you need to know enough of the application, the differences of, generator, A versus generator B. You need to understand it high level enough. But I'm never going to become an expert in understanding equipment and being a mechanic.
Yeah.
That's just stuff that is way beyond me. But to become an expert in the industry and how things work, that's where I think I can actually, you know, take time to become.
Yeah. Great. One of your other learnings, Joseph, this was from last June, so you would have been about 6 months into the business, was the difference between revenue and cash. So revenue was looking good, cash less so. We've already heard about how tight things got in buying a seasonal business
Yeah.
in the down season. Tell us about this learning.
Yeah, no, in a super working capital intense business like a distributor, you really have to understand when customers pay you and when vendors are expected to pay you. One of the first things that I focused on in the business for the first year was really rectifying a lot of relationships with my vendors, because I would say the old owner really stretched out his payables. Like really, like everybody was net 30, but actual payable days was about 70. And that is long. So, really rectifying that and paying vendors on time. But also, understanding that some customers just, pay 65, 70 days. And I would say in this industry, and specifically for A&A, there's definitely a balance of trying to get that sale, but also knowing that this customer could potentially pay slow. And I'm still in the mindset of getting as much sales as possible. I don't think I've afforded the cushion yet to really pick and choose my customers that pay well. But, it's just from the cash flow perspective, it's really understanding the expectation from when customers going to pay you, and when you're going to pay your vendors.
Yeah.
So that's a real issue. Even though you're selling, we were 20% better last year in revenue, but when you look at the cash, when you look at the bank at the end of the year, it's lower than the previous year. Why? Right? It's tied in inventory, tied in, paying vendors, etc. So really getting a grasp on your weekly cash flow is really important, which, I'm still trying to get the hang of it now, but I have a way better sense now versus at the beginning.
But you started a cash flow forecasting
Yeah.
weekly ritual.
Yes, every Saturday morning, I pretty much do a couple things. I look at, every transaction in the bank account. I do my, my historic cash flow of, what I thought was going to come in versus what I actually got. And I'll just say this, trying to project out when I'm going to receive cash from customers is impossible. It is impossible to predict out when my customers are going to pay me. I know on average they're going to pay me in 45 days, but to say I'm going to receive this amount next week, it's impossible to project out. And that's where it's made me really appreciate recurring revenue versus, the non-recurring when contractors are going to pay me. So I, do the cash flow report, look at my bank account, look at every transaction, look at, my, purchase orders, look at my sales orders. But yeah, the cash flow projection and, trying to understand when we get paid is very, very important.
Mhm. And I heard you say that the previous owner's payables were aggressive, meaning when you guys paid your vendors, but that would help your cash flow position because you're holding on to cash and not paying you're holding on to cash and stretching out when you actually pay your vendors what you owe them. So I would think that that would be a good thing, but it sounds like reading between the lines, it can, if you are too aggressive there, it can damage the relationship with vendors.
Correct.
You become a customer that they don't love because you don't pay on time or
Yeah,
very
that's
whatever
exactly
reliably.
it. Yeah, it will help with their cash flow, but one thing I found out after I bought the business was the business lost a distribution line for a specific kind of pipe due to slow payments from the old owner. But I didn't know that before I bought the business. I found out through, talking to this person, talking to that person. And the general reputation was a slow payer. Customers loved him. Great guy, nice guy, right? The owner allowed them to pay him in whatever, 70, 90 days. Vendors, different story. And even though the seller was a great guy, nice guy, that's the reputation. And once you have that reputation, it takes a long time to fix it, to fix a reputation of being a slow payer. And the most important thing to a distributor is what manufacturing lines are you representing? So if you have second tier, third tier distribution lines, right, that's way different than having the tier one distribution lines that you could potentially have if you're paying vendors on time.
Mhm.
So the relationship balance versus paying, I'd rather pay vendors on time. Um, even if it's a, reputation, or even if it's tighter on my
Working
working
capital.
capital, I'd
Yeah.
rather my reputation with my suppliers is everything because without them, I don't have a business.
In April, your April piece, you wrote, "Be patient, then be urgent." What is that lesson?
Yeah, I'd say so. The be patient part is trying to that was trying to expand into a lot of different initiatives. So I would say in the small business world, there's a lot of shiny objects, and I don't know if you've talked about this, but it's like the shiny object syndrome, where
Sure.
there's a lot of opportunities here, opportunities with customers, vendors, um, but it was being very selective and patient in what you really value as what is the actual needle movers. But once you find that out, then really be urgent in growing that. So that specific topic was likely to my focus on growing service because at the beginning when I bought the business, I didn't really appreciate the service side of the business. But after the winter, after the first couple months, really understanding the value that having a good service side does for my building material side, that's where I really focused on. So it's really making sure I listen to the mechanics. What else do they need? Trying to expand into other service lines, and then I ended up hiring another mechanic in June. So, I had one mechanic when I bought the business. Now I have three.
Mhm.
So that's where I'm really focusing right now. But, I think you got to really understand what you need to be urgent on. But you got to be very selective on your time. So
Yeah.
that's yeah.
A bunch of your takeaways from across a number of the articles actually were about surprise, surprise, people
Yeah.
and culture that you set, your leadership. Um, so one thing that I really liked was your learning that the owner sets the emotional temperature.
Yeah.
Remember that one?
Yep. So that one, it's I think energy is a big thing. I think whenever you're talking to people, being a leader, your energy and tone is very important. So even if you're having a really bad day, right? Customers are pissing you off, vendors pissing you off, people paying slow, right? You need to have the same level of energy that you had when you're having a great day. And I think that is the job as the leader of the business, is to set that emotional tone, because I'm I really feel like the emotional tone that you set, your employees are gonna, feed off. If you're if you're slow and you're depressed, I feel like your employees are not gonna be happy, and they're gonna be depressed as well. So that's why whenever you go in for the day, you gotta bring that level of energy, just because I really feel like that the employees feed off of it.
It's at least it landed on me, that one, Joseph, because I think that's one of my own weaknesses. I'm very subject to my own moods. So if
Oh
I
yeah,
get in a
no, for
bad,
sure.
well, I guess probably we all are. Maybe I'm just moodier than the norm. But I see it in my, not only my professional life, but in my family life as well. It's definitely something I could work on and understand. But you just that, yeah, understanding that your mood as leader actually impacts people. It's not just, self-contained. It's bleeding out on it. Everybody else is probably pretty basic, but one I'm still struggling with to this day.
It's impossible to let your work not impact your emotion. But I think if you're gonna go into being a leader and a owner, you have to always be aware of trying to delineate those two. And I'm not perfect. Like there was another day where I knew that I was sad, and my tone came off, but after that I was like, oh shit, I gotta bring it back. Right. So
Yeah,
it's just
yeah,
you just gotta always be aware of it.
yeah, yeah. It's great. I love this one from also from last December, so a couple months ago. The real unlock wasn't quote unquote finding the perfect people. It was setting expectations, creating repeatable onboarding, giving autonomy while building checks, letting leaders emerge. In other words, it was finding good people, but there's maybe no such thing as the perfect person. Um, and then it's what you build around them and the culture that you create. I guess.
Yeah.
Say more about what you meant.
Yeah. No, I'd say leading into all of that, the the biggest thing that I did at the beginning was listening to the employees. One thing that I think everybody should do when they buy a business is ask every employee, what's 5 things that you like about the business? What's 5 things that you think can be improved? And you aggregate those 5 things that could be improved, and then you focus on the top priorities. So I think once you do that, just even listening to them and taking their opinion to heart, they understand, like, okay, this guy really wants to, improve the business, is listening to me. And I will say that even doing that, um, was was big, because the old owner was just he wasn't he was a good owner, but he didn't really appreciate full transparency, which I'm all about. So I think asking them questions, listening to them, but also being transparent of what I'm gonna do really set the tone of the expectation of how I want the business to be run. So I think starting there was great, where, listening to them was big, setting expectations and executing on what I was gonna do, or
Mhm.
executing what I was gonna say. But also, like, another thing as far as like engraving culture was, I'm real big on discussing things. So we have a meeting every day in the morning, just like quick 5 minutes, 10 minutes. How is everybody doing? What's the top priorities for the day? When I first did that, people were like, what the heck is this? Like,
Mm.
what is, So now it's a normal thing. Now my general manager leads that. So, starting that at the beginning and having that as, part of the team, team culture, now it's just a normal thing. So I think it's slowly instilling habits within everybody, having people discuss things. If something's not working, tell me about it. I think really engraving that really helps the business grow, you know, I'm allowed to not be there anymore, right? The GM can run it because he knows how I like to do things. So he's doing things that I did at the beginning.
So if somebody's out there looking for some, GM
Yeah.
for their business, and they're looking for that perfect person and they're not finding them, not finding them, not finding them, do you think that maybe they're doing it wrong?
I think aside from looking for that perfect person is I firmly believe that each person has their main skill or like what they're best at, right? And I think it's the job as the leader to figure out what are they really good at and make them do that thing over and over again and really bring out the best in them. So, for example, one of my mechanics, he's really good at working on a specific piece of equipment, right? Or working on like 3 or 4 pieces of equipment. But instead of him being the perfect mechanic and doing everything, I've, molded him just working on that kind of stuff to make it as efficient as possible. My inside sales guy is really good at talking to customers. So he's the main guy talking to customers all the time. So it's really like I think you're never gonna find the perfect employee. Like I'm nowhere near perfect, but it's trying to figure out what is everybody best at and
Yeah.
trying to put that all together.
Last point here, and then we'll close up, Joseph. I loved this little excerpt. You said, I diffused an argument between employees with a conversation that ended with, quote, discussions like this may make me want to do good work for you, end
Yeah.
quote, by one of your employees. And then you say, that was by far my proudest moment so far. What happened
Yeah.
there?
Yeah. So it was a heated discussion between two of my two of my employees. One employee likes to approach a certain problem one way. The other employee likes to approach it a different way. So it was a matter of talking to both of them, really listening to what is the core issue of why they can't work together, and then trying to find common ground. A lot of the things that I think I just do is just listen to people, and then
Mhm.
try to figure out the solution. Um, but then after listening to what was the core issue, it was merely of a very simple thing that the one employee could have done better. And then it was bringing them together, trying to get them to agree on that one solution. And then that one guy saying that. So I think it was because the old owner would have never done that. He would have just said, "This is how it's done. You're gonna do it."
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that the contrast of listening, understanding, and implementing was such a stark difference of just doing as I say that it made him, say that. And I remember I told my wife about that. I was like, this is great. This is an awesome feeling. So that was, yeah, definitely still one of my, proudest moments. Yeah.
Great. Well, congratulations for it, Joseph. That's great. Tell us where the business is today in terms of numbers, and we'll close
Yeah.
out there.
Yeah, so 2024, it was about 1.2 million. Last year we did about 1.5 million. 55% of that growth was due to service, and then 20% was material, and the rest was equipment. And then this year the goal is 2 million. So we're off to a good track in January and February, beating the budget. We just landed our first $100,000 contract that's going to go out in June for selling this clay bentonite type material. And I'm working on a job right now where it's a $3.5 million 5-year contract with a pretty big general contractor doing some work in O'Hare. So the way I would summarize is, this year is there's a lot of good things in the air right now. Now I'm just waiting for a couple of them to actually drop. Whereas the first year was just stabilizing,
Mhm.
understanding, figuring out where we could press for growth without stepping on toes. Now I think this year is going to be a pretty good year.
And I think you said you're eyeing 5 million in total revenue for 2030.
Yeah, that is the goal for
Did I
just
see that?
A&A. Yes. Yeah, that is the goal. Why? I don't know. I just picked that number because I thought it was realistic, and I like the number 5 million.
And when you say for just A&A, what do you mean by that?
So definitely planning to grow through acquisitions. My long-term goal is to build a platform business with the combination of a very strong distributor and equipment repair side. There's a lot of room for potential, organic growth, but also inorganic growth through acquisitions. And I've talked to a lot of those companies already. So now I'm trying to figure out what are the best pieces to put together down the road. But I think A&A can get to 5 million on its own. But I'm definitely going to be, talking to other businesses to partner with and invest in, potentially acquire.
And where you are now in your day-to-day, Joseph, is despite the fact that all of the knowledge was locked up in the GM and owner's heads, didn't even have a list of vendors written down anywhere. You painstakingly extracted all that information, wrote it down, centralized it, including a lot of other unglamorous work, cleaning the bathroom for the first time in 10 years. I
No.
think you talk about doing,
Yeah.
um, dusting old boxes of inventory that had literally had, centimeters of dust on them
No.
because they hadn't been touched in so long. All of this stuff you've basically done in the first 14, 15 months. And now you're mostly working on the business, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say working on the business like 60, 70% of the time. I would say I'm still
Yeah.
working in the business, 40%. I'm still there 3.5 days, since I have my daughter now, I'm here at home, watching her
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So, I'm not there full time right now, which is great, that I can afford that flexibility right now. But I'm still, sending out quotes, talking to customers, seeing customers, talking to vendors, still putting out fires. Um, yeah, I think I'm still gonna be working in the business. I don't see an end in sight. I mean, I think it's just always something that I enjoy doing. I love talking to customers, making sales, really talking to customers, understanding who their, families are and all that. I really enjoy that.
Yeah.
So, but I would say I'm definitely working on the business more than I was, at the beginning.
Yeah. And to the extent that you're working in the business, a lot of that is at your discretion, it sounds like, because
Yeah,
you enjoy it, because you feel like it's also just part of continuing to understand your own business and learn. Um, and I think you and I talked about on the pre-call that becoming an expert and just really, really learning your business and your industry by being in the business for some during the early years of your ownership is a model that not to be run away from. It's to be
correct.
embraced. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's at least
everybody
your
needs to work.
philosophy.
Yeah, everybody needs to work in their business 100% for until they're comfortable talking to customers and selling them whatever they do. I think whatever time that is, you have to do it. You need to understand the operations, the sales, right? The people, because you're also, when you're doing that too, you're gaining the trust and respect of your employees. Because if you automatically start working on the business, I mean, I don't know. My employees be like, what is this? Like, you haven't even
Mm,
earned the right to, to figure out what to do. Right. So
yeah.
I don't know. That's how I feel about it. And, I think it helped me figure out how to work on the business.
Well, Joseph, let's leave it there. We will link to your LinkedIn. We'll link to the pieces you've written on LinkedIn. We'll link to A&A dot equipment, right?
It's just
AA dot equipment.
AA dot equipment. My wife made that. It's a unique URL.
AA dot equipment. Great. Really appreciate the time we went over today, but there was a lot to cover. Excellent
Yeah.
interview. Thank you, sir, for joining us.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate it, Will.
Hope you enjoyed that interview. Don't forget to subscribe to the Acquiring Minds newsletter. We send an email for every episode with an introduction to the interview, a link to the video version on YouTube, and soon, key takeaways, numbers, and more essentials from the interview for those of you who don't have time to listen or watch it. Subscribe at acquiringminds.co. You'll also find all our webinars there on the website, both those we have coming up and recordings of past webinars. At this point, there are over 30 webinar recordings, a wealth of information on all the technical nitty-gritty of buying a business. acquiringminds.co.